How's it going, man?
Good. How are you?
How's the weather over there in Jersey?
It's rainy today. Rainy and cloudy.
Bleak.
Yeah,
Yes.
bleak.
I was just in Vegas for 4 days, soaking up the sun. You were there too.
I was there, yeah. I was
And it's,
soaking up the poker room.
yeah. soaking up, soaking up COVID, more likely.
Yeah, yeah. I did get COVID.
I'm amazed I didn't. The amount of people I was around, but
Bro, you have COVID immunity. Like
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like COVID enters your body and is like, "Oh, I got to get out of here."
Yeah. There's way worse things going on in here. I'm peacing out. That's true. Take it from me. This is not an advice podcast, but if you pretend it doesn't exist, you may just be all right. Nah, man, Vegas is so much fun, dude. I have such a good time there. I'm glad we always go for like 3 or 4 days because like that last day, I'm like, if I stay one more day, I'm not leaving. I'm just never gonna go back to real life because it feels like a vacation from life, you know?
Yeah, dude, it is like it's an entire city that's an adult playground.
Yeah.
And it's just there's something about it where it's just every single thing there is just made to be like an adult player. Yeah, I don't know.
It's made to make you feel like happy and comfortable and fun and like you have 100 times as much money as you actually do.
Yeah.
Until you get back home and check your bank account. It was a good time though. We were there with some programmer business friends, and it was fun talking about build UI and courses, and I think we'll have some updates for folks soon on that. But it's fun thinking about the next course we're going to do, the content we want to focus on, doing some more writing on our blog. So it's always good. Those conversations are always so great and motivating.
Yep.
But today we have some fun stuff to talk about. Speaking of the blog, I've been kind of hacking on it, and I was in like a crazy late night coding session last night. It was fun. It was, those coding sessions where you're learning about something new. Okay, first of all, what are the qualifications of a great late night coding session? At least 18 tabs open from like 5 different libraries and the GitHub issues for 2 of them. You're in a good spot if you're doing that, because that's like the right level of you're confident enough, where you're going, but you're learning so much because you don't know how to do it really. And then a second qualification of a great night coding session is if you have chat GPT open to write you regexes, which I had both of those last night. So
I was gonna ask, did you use Copilot at all?
no, I'm
Okay.
not about Copilot yet. I find it distracting. And also I find Copilot and chat GPT great if I'm figuring kind of things out conceptually, but once I know where I want to go, I want to read the docs because I don't want to be misled. And there's a couple times where I've dived into it with Copilot or GPT, and it's told me something from an out of date version, and our app is in a specific version. So I want to look up the versions of Next and all that stuff that we're using. So I really don't, how I am. I have very low tolerance. Like I don't use PMPM because there's a 1% chance it's going to break. And if I'm focused on these things, I just want I want the fewest amount of variables changing in front of me. You know what I mean? So
I do. I do feel
you're
like
going
when
to
you're
challenge my use of Copilot, not use of Copilot.
well, when you're talking about the late night coding session, like the qualifications, where it's like
Yeah.
you kind of enter this zone where it's like
Yeah.
you're writing code, and then you're about to write like regex is actually a great example of this. You're about to write some code. It's not important to like the task you're doing, and then Copilot just boom throws it right in there, and like you just get to complete it and then go on. So you kind of like stay at
And
that
that
higher
level of
level.
abstraction that you want to
Yeah.
be at. Yep. I can totally buy that. I was, it was one of those things where there actually wasn't a lot of code I was writing. So there was like 4 lines or something. And it was hard to figure out those 4 lines. So I felt like instead of having to do a bunch of transforms and just playing with APIs that I was somewhat familiar with, it was like understanding the moving pieces and making sure I was using the right APIs, and then
Cool.
reading the docs for like conceptual understanding of what was happening.
Nice.
But let me set the stage. So we just created, like, added a blog on buildui.com, and like every blog, it's has a lot of engineering in it. No, it's actually not that bad. But we uh, have two blog posts that we started out with, and they're just MDX files in our repository. And Next and MDX have a nice happy path story when your files are local. There's some stuff that we have already configured in Build UI because our summaries for our videos are MDX. We have other content on the site that's MDX, like the recipes. And kind of the easiest way to compile MDX and render it into your React app in a Next.js app is when they're local. So we had that working, and I wanted to put them in our CMS because I was like fixing typos in my blog post that people were telling me about, and I hated the workflow of like running locally and changing, removing a colon to a period and then pushing and waiting a couple minutes and seeing it live. I just want that in our CMS the way the rest of our content is. So I was trying to think, and I want to start writing more, just like more thoughts down and make it easy to write as possible.
Hmm.
And while I do love authoring Markdown files locally in my code editor, it doesn't outweigh the benefit, I think, for me of having it basically being able to create content live in the site the way we can with some other stuff on the site. So I think that's going to be better. That's going to outweigh the benefits of writing locally. And I have an idea, like a dream, of wanting to play around with building a nice editor in like our admin panel that uses like a VS Code, whatever, embedded version that lets you have Vim and stuff. So it basically feels like using our editor. It has syntax highlighting, and we can do our code blocks and everything the way we do. But I think that would be super easy. So that's kind
That's
of
great.
like
That is
that's like
great.
my end goal.
Yeah, find the things that you love about local editing and see if you can get those in the browser. Because
Exactly.
that's the thing. It's like every time you create a WYSIWYG thing, it's just the way content editable works. It's so hard to get that right. I'll even say it's like impossible to get that right.
Yeah.
But doing
Yeah.
something where it's like VS Code in the browser,
They have it. I mean, they
yeah,
have it. It's
yeah,
super
no,
easy to use.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's great.
So I,
That's a really good idea.
I think whenever we talk about this and we talk about wanting to just stay local, that's probably the biggest reason why. We're used to our Vim key bindings, and we want to
Yep.
see code folding and syntax highlighting in Markdown blocks, code fences. So that's the goal. And so if that's the goal, what's the intermediate step is to get the whole thing into our CMS. Now, MDX is interesting because MDX can have imports. And in my newest blog post, I wrote some custom React components that I used in the blog posts. I wrote specifically the main one that's the most sophisticated is a demo component that has a file viewer component as part of it. And these are just React components. And the demo takes a URL and it shows, a demo. And some folks on Twitter were asking about the code demos in my post and asking if they were like, embedded, like code sandboxes, or like there's a new code sandpack thing. For this and for all of our content, our recipes too, actually, we like to just have a separate repo that we deploy to Vercel because it's really easy and really free, and it's perfect for the serverless, it's perfect for all this stuff. And then we just iframe it. And I like that because those code sandboxes, no matter which one you use, eventually there's just too many failure points. And also the main reason is because when I'm teaching something, I really want to show off a demo in the most streamlined version possible. I don't want you editing it. I mean, it's nice if you can edit it, and I get the idea, the benefit of having the code that's actually powering the demo right there, so you can really see everything, and you're proving that this is the code that's powering the demo you're seeing. But to me, that doesn't outweigh the benefit of having it instantly load and removing all the distractions of the Chrome, of the editor, and giving you some affordance that you're supposed to play with this. I mean, if I was making a blog post or a video that was like, you should play with this, that's different. But in these
Right.
cases, in our case of our recipes, I'm showing off a technique. and I want a super streamlined example. So for people asking, that's all that is. It's just an iframe basically. And with MDX is really nice because, if you don't know MDX is, super set of Markdown lets you write React components that you can drop into your Markdown files. And you can pass like demo 1, demo 2. They're just like URLs to this repo that I have hosted. And then I also have like a show code button in my demo. And it can render syntax highlighted code boxes in like a little tabbed editor thing. Blocks, rather. Syntax highlighted code blocks. And those are also imports. And the way I wrote it when I did it all locally was all of those code samples are .mdx files with the triple code fences and the language, because of the fact that, again, the happy path is when you configure Next and MDX in the normal way, any file on disk that's an MDX file gets turned into something that you can render by React. So it makes it really easy. You just import it like you would any other React component. And now I can pass those things like into my demo component, and demo can accept like an array of files and render them inside of its little tabbed browser, which I made with like radix tabs. So it's pretty cool setup. It's pretty nice. And the question was how to turn all that into CMS-ifiable kind of content. So this is the beginning of my journey. And let me just try to walk through it. The first thing I tried was, okay, we have MDX working, and I have these MDX components that are being provided to the blog post page. So it knows how to render a demo component. It knows how to render like an H2 and stuff. And so how can I just get this content remotely? So if you look at MDX's remote docs, then they're kind of in a strange state right now, because an MDX file, like the set of all APIs that MDX supports, includes imports. So my blog post imports the demo component locally, and then it uses it. So then you start asking yourself, well, if I were to put the contents of this file in a CMS and request it, either at build time or at runtime, but it's separate, what the heck does that import mean, right? Because for that import to work, like this is no longer a string of Markdown. It's almost like you need to eval it.
Yeah, you do. You do. Yeah,
You do. So that's how MDX remote works?
I'm not sure. I know that there's two. There's like one that Kent wrote that uses like ES build to like basically fetch your MDX and then build build the app and then be able to render that. And MDX remote, I don't think it does eval. I think you can provide it with components. So I'm not sure it can. I'm not sure about this, but I know when I used it, I avoided putting imports in the CMS.
So that's kind of where I went next. I was like, it really doesn't make sense to have the imports here. And also, I'm not expecting to be writing new components for every blog post. I mean, maybe we expand the amount of components that are available to our blog post as like an API. So we could do like a build UI slug or a build UI video and it does a cool embed, or a YouTube component and it does a cool embed.
Right, but
you can provide those from the application.
Right. The idea is you're not going to be writing one-off components for blog
exactly.
posts. So the import statement per blog post is less attractive.
Exactly. And this also gets at the idea that we're separating the content from the code, right?
Yep.
And part of the point of all this is like, I want to make an edit to a blog post. That's like content that I should be able to do without redeploying. Whereas if I edit the demo component, that's different. That's code that's running. Some of it's going to run on the server maybe, and then it has to be bundled and shipped to the client so that radix tabs can work. So that makes sense. That's like a separation of content and code.
No, it's like you're two people here, even though you're one person, but there's two roles you're coding for. The first role is a person that's writing components that can be used in blog posts. And then the second person is you writing a blog post, and you're never wearing those two hats at the same time.
Exactly. So, then I was like, okay, and we were chatting about this a little bit last night. I was like, okay, so what if we just did the content and the imports are stripped out and the demo is provided in the MDX provider so that whenever it sees something called demo, it knows to reference it. And that's kind of where I was trying to head down. And I was trying to think, how can I get the contents of that file, bring it into the app, and then basically turn that string, which is like the FS read file of the same file I would have on disk, into something that I can do the same thing with that I would on disk, right? And I was getting stuck there. I forget what I was running into, but it wasn't clear or obvious. There's no really first party way to do this.
There's a little trick you can do here, which is what we did on, I think it was like Headless UI. So you can read an MDX file, and you can, there are part of MDX is like you take the actual markdown content and then you transform it into an AST.
Right.
And then once you have the AST, there's like a section for the literal imports. And so you can go into that AST and you can start importing, like you can add your own imports. So you could like add an import to demo. And then you basically, now you have a thing that's runnable, a component that's runnable. I don't know what you want to call it, like a MDX AST that's runnable. Runnable.
Right. It's a compiled MDX file that is you can then pass to render somehow.
Yeah. Yep. And you can like insert your own imports. And
right.
So we would do that like at
build time.
At build time for like things like the demo component that everything used, like a table component that everything used. I go back and forth on this. Like I kind of like the explicit imports, but I totally understand that like when you have the thing in the CMS that it's a lot harder.
It's confusing. Right. Yeah. It's harder. Right. So I was kind of reading the MDX docs about this sort of thing and their APIs along these lines, and also looking at Next.js-remote, which is like the most popular way to kind of bring all this stuff together. And it seemed like it's kind of in a weird spot. The whole MDX ecosystem is in a bit of a strange spot right now compared to when I first looked at it a couple of years ago.
It always has been. I mean, it's great.
It always
has
great.
Been. Yeah, it's great, but it's hard. It's hard to understand how all these pieces come together, especially with remote content. I think Next.js-remote is a good starting point. Like I think that's where I usually end up, and it usually solves the problem.
The thing that's tricky is like I was starting to do that, and then I was also worried about it working on Edge, and I saw some issues that seemed to suggest that people were having trouble with that because we use like the Edge in this page. We try to use like Vercel's Edge on most of our pages, but even setting that aside, we have like MDX and Next MDX in our package, and then you look at Next config and it has like with MDX, and it's all configured as part of either like those things either use Webpack or something to get the MDX files on disk into the right place. And kind of as we were talking about this, I was realizing that this problem space is very similar to RSC's problem space. Because if you give me the blog post source, the markdown, it has something called demo that it's trying to render. And then it has all this markdown that I want to turn into static React elements. So what I really want is, I was like, I wonder if I could do this in an RSC, where if I have this string, which I can just start out with in a variable in my page, but I could ultimately fetch from the CMS, can I turn this thing into, I basically want to turn like pound heading and then like, hello world, and then like demo component into function, my server component, return, H2 this, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, you can do that with just Markdown, because if you're running a server component and you're a node, you can just use a Markdown parser, a Markdown converter, something that turns Markdown into like a React component or into HTML or something, right? You could just do that and set, something like that.
Yeah. I think where it gets tricky, man, is the capital D demo component. Once you have that, then you're in the MDX land.
Well, but this is what I was thinking. Like part of what makes MDX and ecosystems like Remark and Prism and all of these things, this is not like passing judgment on MDX in particular. I think it's just this set of tools trying to make things that compose and plugins work with each other and have them work with all the different build tool systems. It's just kind of like really confused. It just gets confusing because they
It's
all
low.
have their own
It's
ways
low
of
level.
doing
Yeah, it's low
low
level.
level. It's like Webpack loaders, and they all have their own systems for composing with each other in like a plugin ecosystem. But most people just try to follow the guide, and they don't really understand. I mean, at least I'm speaking for myself. I don't really understand what's going on when I add like a remark, rehype, hydra plugin thing. So if I could get this string into like if my only job was to turn this markdown string into a React component definition that left the components alone, but turned the rest into React elements. I was like, if you knew where the imports were, if you could provide the imports, which is basically what MDX is doing, but MDX is doing it in its own way. If you could do it in a way that was basically like rendering an RSC, and you think about that, then you kind of get the behavior for free in the sense that if RSC was given something that said import demo from MDX components and it returned all this static these
Hmm.
React elements, but then the client components, and then from then on, your job is done and you don't need anything special. You don't need a provider in the client. You don't need to use MDX at all because it's the same problem space. You need to turn this thing into a format that can be sent over the wire and where demo references something that is going to be a React component on the client. And it kind of clicked for me that like, whether you're doing MDX, like MDX basically has its own version of like the RSC payload where it's like you take this, like you said, or
It's
any of these
AST.
tools. Is an AST that's serialized, right? And it's serializable. You can JSONify it, and it's either going to have children that know how to call create element with like a p tag, or it's going to reference a component that must be loaded in the client by the time that thing is rendered and referenced by the time it actually executes on the client. So I thought that was really interesting.
That's a great point. That's a great insight.
Basically, I wanted to look back and see what else it made me think of, because I've seen Shu from Vercel, and from like he's done a bunch of open source stuff, SWR, right, a bunch of other stuff. He's been tweeting lately about how the RSC payload format is really the secret sauce of the whole thing. And I think I'm starting to like understand that more deeply each time I kind of revisit it. Because what problem does this Markdown MDX ecosystem have? It's getting a serialized version of something from here, from the server, over to here, the client. And there needs to be holes, client holes, that reference something that's running over here. And if you think about my job of turning this local MDX file, which has imports pointing to local demo components and then Markdown, versus my job as how do I get the content from the CMS that's over here to reference code in my application over here? It's actually the same thing.
Hmm.
This code over here is like, it's more like the server component in the sense that the demo can't be executed by the CMS, but the rest of the stuff knows what it is. And then the application knows how to turn, it does like the server render pass where it turns that into a hole, and then it ships up the right code to the client, which eventually renders it all. So yeah, I was pretty struck by the fact that not only is like the RSC payload and RSC the to render pass, the one that turns it into, and people have said things like, I wonder if server components should be named serialized components. And that's kind of an interesting insight too, where you're looking at something that needs to execute code, but it needs to be first transmitted across a network boundary. So it needs to be serializable. And it's actually the same problem, you know? But RSC solves it and more. It's a superset of that problem space. And so I was thinking like, well, this is really interesting. If all we need to do is get some source content into something that looks like an RSC that imports client components and renders anything else, then why can't we just make an RSC that does something like await fetch my markdown from a content, call await markdown.render, and markdown is not MDX. It doesn't even know it's in a React app. It doesn't know anything about that. It just turns the markdown into like elements, and then I have like a component that returns that, you know. So you can imagine just doing something with Node in the body of your RSC. And as long as what you end up with looks like that server component that has a reference that renders some client component somewhere, then you don't need a plugin system. You don't need MDX. You don't need any special way to load anything. Think about this. If you wanted to make it so that you can load an MDX file on disk and turn it into a route, you could just do it in an RSC in the body of a render function. Yeah. And when I go to see what this thing does, I can just command definition and go to definition on this. It's just going to read file and, you know, markdown, compile. And there's no plugin ecosystem because for the same reason we don't need a plugin system with our normal components. They compose, they can use all the React features on both the client and the server. And so I was thinking like, even for loaders, right? I was thinking about Webpack. What is Webpack's job? Webpack's job is to do server-only transformation that's appropriate at build time, you know, or development time or on the server, and make it easy, for example, to import an SVG. So you can have a background.svg file in your project. You can configure a Webpack loader so that when you import it, it like turns it into a React component. You could do that in a server component because a server component only ever runs on the server. And any React developer knows how React components work. You could have like an SVG component that takes in a path and you could open it up. It could read the file.
Everything that's in the Webpack loader just moves into a component.
Yes.
And the beauty of it being into a component, you said this earlier, but it composes. So now that this is usable, this is like it's a first-class citizen of your app, of your React app. Where when it's a Webpack loader, it's not. It's like this thing that has to happen at build time. React doesn't know about it. It can't receive new props, you know, and so on and so on.
Dude, it composes and it doesn't depend on any. It doesn't care about your build. If you're running an app that can render server components, now I can put a SVG file, an SVG component on npm, and you can use it, and you can point it. If the source is a local file, my server component will read fs.read file it. Maybe it'll run it through svgo or whatever, and it'll return, you know, an optimized like JSX tree of the SVG, and you could add props. Like you could do anything you would do you could add Tailwind class. You could do anything you would do with it. Mm-hmm. If the source file is like a remote file, then, you know, it could fetch it. It could like await and fetch it. You could also have a mode where it renders like an image tag with an object, or, you know, you could do like image source object with the SVG object. You know, you could calculate its dimensions. You know, Next.image does some of this, right? With Next.image, if you import the image and pass the imported image to Next.image, it knows how to calculate the aspect ratio. What if Next.image was just a server component, and when you open it up, it's just, oh, it's a local file. I'm going to await it. I'm going to read the dimensions of it. So easy to understand. I don't have to understand how this import line is being turned into some metadata, and it depends on Webpack, and it's different with ES build. It's just node code running in my server component. Pretty interesting stuff. I was also thinking about liquid tags in like an email builder or any sort of thing that has this notion of like content that's a mix of static and placeholders for dynamic stuff. And that problem space like perfectly like it's crazy to me that RSC is a solution for that whole problem space, and that just falls out of the architecture. That wasn't like an explicit design goal, but you can imagine if you were building like a email authoring tool that you could use RSCs to do all of this, and your users could define client components and reference them in the body, and your job, you wouldn't have to Webpack this or whatever. You just, if you can just do it in the RSC, you're good to go, right? And like if you can get the file into something that looks like a server component, React can take care of the rest because the RSC serialization format, the RSC payload, just covers all of this. It's like a serialized tree of data. And because it's serializable, it can live in a CMS, it can live in a text file, it can live apart from the code that needs to run in the client, and it can also ship the client parts as a script tag so that it's loaded when it actually executes in the client.
That's a key point. Because it's serializable, half of it can run on a server, serialize it, and then you can give that serialized format to the client, and then the client can like finish the job.
Dude, and then it's like, how do you do something like, I only want to render this at build time because I don't want this thing to run every time. It's the same problem as like, how do I maybe cache an expensive server component, or in Next by default server components run at build time if they're like static, if they don't depend on anything at request time. It just falls out of it, But the authoring experience is so good. So, anyways, I was pretty excited about all this because I think when the React team talks about the kind of vision for RSCs, and that it goes way beyond fetching data in a React component, although that's again something that falls out of the architecture. I think this is the kind of thing they're talking about. I was imagining a world. Dream with me for a second. There's no Webpack. There's no configuring rehype plugin processors. I mean, even Tailwind. So style sheet. This is another thing. We were talking about style sheet, remember? You were like, oh, we have these lines. Import space open string tailwind CSS close string. Like, what is that doing? What is that doing? Nobody knows what that's doing. How would you even find out?
Yeah.
What if there was a style sheet component that you render and you pass the source to, and then when you open it, it's like all right there in the body of a React server component, and it doesn't have to be configured with your build pipeline or it. You know what I'm saying? It's like it feels like there's a lot of possibilities here for the kinds of things we've used build tooling for, going back to Gulp and Grunt and now to things like Webpack. You still need a bundler because you need to traverse the import graph. But again, if your app can do that for React for your components already, if you can get the result of whatever you're trying to do into a component that has then the bundler and React and RSC and React on the client take care of everything else.
Yep. You're not saying we need to get rid of a bundler. You're saying we were using the bundler in the past
for too much
to do server work.
Yes.
And now we have a first class way to express it. And it's great because that first class way works in any system. Anything that supports RSC, and it's React. You can pop open a component. You can look at it.
Exactly. And you could see some stuff in there doing whatever. Creating SVGs with D3, whatever. It can do anything. And it can be cached or done at build time and not at runtime. I think the bundler needs to be able to traverse the module graph, so follow import statements to other modules. Right now, those modules are going to be files on disk. In the future, they could be parts of files on disk or something else. But it needs to be able to traverse the module, the import graph, build up the module graph, and then respect the use client and use server directives. Yep. But again, that's all taken care of. So it's really, really interesting. What was I going to say?
I would love, just kind of bring this back to the blog, I would love to see a server component that, it doesn't have to be MDX, but I think MDX is like, or Markdown is like the easiest thing to envision. But something where like we can like author a Markdown like code into the CMS, and then there's a server component that basically fetches that from the CMS, turns it into a React tree, allows you to have, you know, client components, and then ship that off to the client. Like I would love to see that. I think, and
that's basically what I did last night. So
nice.
let me tell you where I got. So this is kind of what I was thinking, and I was like, man, once I kind of realized this, I was like, I don't want to deal with MDX at all. I don't want to deal with any of these things because I don't want to invest in these like plugin ecosystem things that have like, you know, a highlighter plugin that's like not maintained, and a copy to code thing that's not maintained, and like you have to piece these all together, and you have to have 10 dependencies that work in the same version, and now they're not compatible. It's not. I'm like, if I can do all this in a server component conceptually, why can't I fetch the Markdown, render it with like marked, the npm library, which is like the main Markdown parsing library, whatever, and then do my own like if I can manage to get it into this format, then I'm just working in this server component. I can like look at the first line of the code and find like the curly braces where I do my line highlighting, or I can add a file name to this, or I could add, if I want to, I've been wanting this forever, because the highlighting plugin that we use for Remark on our current thing, you have to put in the file number, the line numbers in brackets. I just want to add like a little comment at the end of the line, something like that. So when you move it around, it stays there. I could just do that stuff myself. Again, back to kind of our ceiling list library conversation. This is a step down, but now we have the tools to do what I need to do here. And the only tools I need are parsing the Markdown. I don't need to write that myself, but I can compose these things together. I can do some string manipulation, and now I can write client components and all this stuff. And I was like, if I do that, I don't need MDX, and I don't need these higher level abstract libraries that are drifting and get unmaintained. I just want the core stuff. I want D3 instead of, you know, a high charts. And so I was like, I don't think I need MDX. So then I was looking and I was like, okay, all I need is some way to get like this thing to a client component, like some special way, syntax to do that. Maybe I'll try myself with Markdown or whatever. And then I looked at Markdoc. Markdoc is Stripe's like superset of Markdown that they use for content editing. And it's designed to be something that makes sense to be in a CMS, because it's like a liquid tag or something like that.
So like serialization is first class.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like the point is that you're never going to have it depend on some piece of code somewhere. It's that level of abstraction where demo is effectively like a tag. It looks like a liquid tag, but it's provided by the environment. And I was like, boom, that's that. If I could turn this demo tag into, right?
Yeah.
So,
and I think just one point that I don't feel like MDX was ever designed for this. MDX was made to write components that you import and then use
in your repo, your repo.
Right. Which you
yes.
did a nice job illustrating at the beginning, but I just want to call it.
Yes, totally. And again, this is like, maybe it's just that was awesome for MDX people, hackers like to be able to write it in their project and redeploy it, you know, with like SSG setups. It makes a lot of sense, but like we are building a dynamic site. We want to be able to update it and have the content separate, blah, blah, blah. So Markdoc is really interesting because it has this feature. And it's like, again, if you squint your eyes, you're looking at a React client tree with holes. you're looking at an RSC payload. Like it's the same thing. It represents work that's already been done and work that has yet to be done. Right? It's the same thing where the demo needs to be filled in on the client, but all the other stuff is static elements that we don't need anything for on the client. So it's like, again, it's this deeper understanding of like when we say server and client, what do we mean? You know, and it's really like which environment is like most suitable for doing this work. You know, we used to, when we did SPAs and we're focused on making things as easy as possible for us. I remember when we first started doing like Markdown rendering on the client in Ember, it's like, it's nice. It's all on the client. You don't have to think about two environments. And there's something nice about that. You just pass everything there. You're loading like this Markdown parser and you're like parsing and rendering on the client. And it feels a little strange that you're doing that work over and over again. Your syntax highlighting for everybody. Every client session is like running the syntax highlighter over and over again, even though it's the same for everybody. But the DX is nice in the sense that it feels like pretty good to do that. And you don't have to really think about these two environments. But it also did feel a little strange. And there was not from a perspective of pre-optimization or performance, from a perspective of UI being responsive. If you remember when we did everything in the client, or people who do everything in the client, if you render a page, you have to fetch the data and then you have to parse and render it, and that's all async. So there's no good place to like do that work, really. And if you look at something like Prism, the React component, or some of those things that work on the client to try to syntax highlight your markdown blocks, your pre tags, they flicker because they take a second to work. It's an async operation. And so a lot of times with these kind of client side solutions, you see that and you're like, okay, maybe it's just not ready yet. And so maybe I use something like suspense to hold it back. But now that we have this notion of server and client, it's so much better and clear because you have a space to do the work before it gets to the client. The work you're doing on the server, turning this thing into the element tree, turning the pre-tags into syntax highlighted pre-tags, that it just makes sense to do it on the server for so many reasons that don't even have to do with like performance or bundle size, right? It's simpler because conceptually what's going to the client is the work that's yet to be done, right? But conceptually, I want to turn this thing into something that's ready to be like handed off to mostly static elements and then some demo interactive components.
I think the main thing I'd say here is like that kind of what you're getting at is like when you're running on the client, you can't block the UI. So
you can't block the UI.
You always need to paint something, which is awkward when you have some async work to do.
Yes.
Because it basically means you have to paint a frame while that async work is running.
Yes.
And so you get a flicker. No matter what, you're going to get the flicker. But on the server, at least on the server, you can block in the sense that you don't start serving up a response until that async work is done.
It's almost like you have this bomb shelter and you can just go to town in your late night node hacking sessions and return this like pristine thing to the client. But it's like, you do start thinking in this terms of like the work that can be done and the work has yet to be done until the user runs it because I don't know which tab they're going to click, right? It's kind of like the Dan's post, the two reacts, right?
But dude, you're saying like you don't want to talk about performance and stuff because I know it's like you think of that as like a YAGMI, but it absolutely matters. I mean, you can't having to ship a Markdown parser and Markdown to the client.
And syntax highlighter with all the languages you might need.
Right. And have the client run those and having to do this for every single client.
Right.
It's like even if it's fast and your users don't complain, you just don't have a seat at the table. You just don't have a seat at the table when you're talking.
I agree. Yep.
So I think right there we can just like
And it's not about performance. It's not about YAGNI. It's like eventually if this is how you're treating all your problems, you are going to be limited and you're going to feel limited. Even if all of these libraries work in the browser, which a lot of them don't, and you never had a real way to
Yeah.
use them otherwise. So for all those reasons, everything you're saying is awesome. So we've been going a long time already, but I want to jump real quick to the solution because there's some other stuff I want to say, which is Markdoc is this serialized string format. It's a serializable format. And so what I did was I didn't do it in a server component. I started doing it, but then I wanted to do it in our Pages app. So get server side props is basically the same thing because what you return from get server side props has to be serializable.
It's even more
This is
restricted. It's even more.
it's
Get
even
server
more
side
restrictive.
is yeah. So it's going to get even better when this goes
Yep,
into a server component. But go ahead. Continue.
exactly. So then what do? Well, you fetch. I add the stuff to RCMS. You fetch the source, and I wrote it as Markdoc, which is just Markdown with little liquid tags instead of React components. But it's nice because, again, you're already thinking this needs to be serializable. So in Markdown, you might go crazy and do in MDX, you might go crazy. You might have like I had some consts at the top, and I like things that use JavaScript memory, right? Which need a JavaScript environment to be running for this thing to work because it's a JavaScript file. But now I'm not. It's not a JavaScript file. So you think more intentionally and deliberately about what can be in there and what can't.
Really good. Really good.
And so when I'm passing files to my demo and file viewer, I can't pass like an imported React component. You know what I'm saying? I need to pass in something serializable. And so that influences the API. So I make some tweaks and dude, it's just a string. So I make up my own API where you put a demo tag and you can just put an array of files like separated by a horizontal line. And in like the transform code, you can just they're already like code fence nodes, so you can just like append. You can just push them, and those things are serializable too. You can just push them into a prop, return it from get server side props. So, anyways, at a high level, I installed Markdoc. I wrote a Markdoc your blog post as a Markdoc doc in our CMS, and get server side props. I fetch it, and then I just go to the Markdoc docs, the documentation, and I use their API to compile and render it. And I'm just following the node docs for them. And I don't care about configuring loaders or plugins or anything. I'm just doing a sequence of node async work until I have something that's serializable that I return from get server side props. And then now I have it in my page, and then I just render it. And I don't need any provider, and I don't need there is like I guess there is the way they do the providers, like you import the client components and then you map, right? They have a mapping. When I'm rendering it, I say that this is a component called Markdoc demo, and then in the server side props, I'm saying every time you see this tag demo, map it to Markdoc demo, and it's just going to figure it out. Again, serializable. See, and they're using the name of the component to match it, but you could imagine an RSC using the actual the component ID. What was it? What's it called in the RSC server?
Client reference.
Client reference.
And
Client
contains
reference.
basically an ID, the file to fetch it from.
There was a time in the middle of my hacking session where I was like, I wonder if I can like introspect the client reference, shove it in there, and that way, like I literally don't have to do anything because
yeah, you could. I'm guessing again. I haven't looked at any of this, but I'm guessing you could, in your server code, you could call the render to readable stream, that basically a thing that gives you an RSC stream, and then pass that down over to the client.
Nice.
Yeah.
So then you render it, and it just works. And it's using my demo import, and I can tab between the files. So I got that working, and then I was like, I really want, I was like, in the MDX version, in a blog post, I exported like my demo component had like an array of files, and I was importing the MDX code snippets from like a relative directory and giving them each a name as a prop. Here in my Markdoc file, I wanted to be able to put an array of files inside of the tags, like the liquid tags. And I was like, how could I give them a name? Well, the code fences start with, backtick, 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 TSX, and then you can open a curly brace for like line highlighting. And then a common pattern in other similar libraries is to have a space and then do like a comma separated value of like key value pairs with equals. Kind of looks like a cookie string. So you could do like file name equals, genres panel dot .tsx. And then in my transform little function, which is just in get server side props, which is just using the node library right from Markdoc. No abstract, nothing, no abstractions. I just look at that initial thing and I say, now my demo tag component exposes not just like a file, but the file has like a name to it. And it's a prop in my demo component. And it's like files is typed as an array of objects with an HTML string and a name, which is a string. HTML is dangerously set, inner HTML, and then the name comes from. I just pull it out of that. I just do like a little string dot. A little regex. That's where ChatGPT was writing my regex. And dude, we can just make our own APIs. And the name, I put it in the tabs, in my radix tabs. I put the code right there in the actual active panel, and I'm not looking at any doc. It felt like when I went from high charts to D3, or from Bootstrap to Tailwind, or from React Select to Radix, because it's like now that I know this handful of primitive tools and APIs, I'm like, that's why I was up till 3, because I was like, I'm not limited anymore. I understand what's happening at each step, and we can just make this API whatever we want it to be. And
Nice.
there's no dependencies, and we don't have to wire together plugins, and nothing's gonna get deprecated, because it's like a few lines of code doing exactly what we need it to do. It's pretty amazing, dude.
Do they have a way when you're serializing? Yes, that sounds amazing. I'm super excited for it. Also, too, this conversation really is very striking to me that MDX is not made for serialization. It's made for you to be authoring a React component and importing it into an MD file and doing both those things at the same time. But that's not what we want. Like, we want exactly what you said. We want to be able to optimize for writing, write and store data in a CMS.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I have a question. When you are rendering, you're taking like this payload out of the CMS and then you're rendering it. They have like something that transforms like this liquid tag into this React component.
Markdoc, yes, yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's literally like it's when you do markdoc.compile, you compile it, and then I think when you do render to turn it into the JSONifiable AST, you provide it with tags. So there's something
called
nodes.
Are tags like HTML tags?
So there's nodes. Nodes are HTML tags, but they call it like, for example, they call it like code fence or fence or code fence or something like that, and that's like their built-in tag, and that's what maps the code fence thing in your Markdown to a component, basically.
Do you like import capital C?
So they have an API that you use to turn that into like HTML, which is kind of like weird and kind of a bummer, and I didn't want to do it. But you can also just pass in a render option, give it a string name that points to a React component, and define which attributes pass through, and like children and anything else like an ID, and then when you call markdoc.render in your client page component, that's where you provide the React components. So
cool.
all of the tags in Markdown can be mapped to all of the core Markdown. What do they call it? Common Mark, like
the HTML
nodes tags. Yeah. Can you do HTML in Markdown? It's basically what Markdown supports. Okay, yeah. So yes. But also like a paragraph tag and a heading and a list or whatever, and a code fence and all this stuff. You can just map those to a React component. And then you can add your own custom tags, which is this kind of, again, serialized version of, and it looks like square brace, $, and then you say demo, and then %, close square brace. You can pass in children. You can pass in attributes to demo, and you can like nest things. So it's pretty cool.
Nice. Dude,
Uh,
from what I'm hearing, I'm guessing this is going to be an easy, or maybe not easy, but there is a path here for it to work with RSC in the sense that
Super
you
easy.
provided a client component and you can quote unquote render this in the server component, and then the client
Super
components
easy.
will get filled in later.
Oh, it would just work. It would just work.
Cool. Very cool.
Dude, it was awesome. So it's just so cool. So you do that blocking work and then you return it and render it. Then I want to add syntax highlighting. I go to Prism JS and the website looks like it's from 2004.
Because it is.
And
No, I'm serious. Because it is. It's 20 years
and
old.
then and then I look at like highlight JS and I'm like, this looks weird. And then I looked at Shiki, which is a new thing. They have a Node API. People are like, how do I use this React? He's like, it's meant to work on the server. Guess what? I'm running get server side props. Boom. Bring it
Yep.
in my transform in Markdoc. I just turn it in. I'm already passing HTML as a string. I just run it. I just literally like HTML to code to HTML or whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah. Get highlighter.
Yeah, not even. It's just one line now. They have one line
Oh, really?
API. Yeah, and it automatically loads WASM and all that stuff. And that's where I ran into the thing where I couldn't use Edge, so I had to go back to Node on Vercel. But that's fine. Um, Dude, it just worked. Now I have syntax highlighting, and I still have like my Markdoc pre React component, which now the children are just syntax high. The HTML prop is just syntax highlighted HTML. I just slap it in dangerously set in inner HTML. It's all highlighted, still is inside of the tabs and the radix tabs. Then I want table of contents. So the way I had the table of contents work in my blog post was I was duplicating the titles because when I wrote it, I had my markdown file and I was making the H2s or whatever, and then I wanted the table of contents on the side, and so I was like, I don't know how to get these from MDX because it's all opaque and I don't know what's going on, and I don't want to go install an MDX table of contents plugin that's gonna break in 2 weeks or whatever. So, and I don't want to deal with remark. Oh, I just didn't want to do that stuff. So when I wrote it in MDX, you could export variables at the top of MDX files. So I exported headings, was like an array of headings. And so I had to duplicate it because then I had to, I had my MDX H2 component, which looked at the text of my heading, slugified it, gave it an ID. And then I had my headings export, which I used to iterate over, render the table of contents, and link to the hash,
Right.
hashtag, whatever. So there's duplication there, and they're not being dynamically generated from the content. Dude, I have the whole file right there, and I have Markdoc H2 tag that I'm already using, and you can just drop your transform function so that I just get it every time I just push the text into it. I'm in get server side props. I just say let titles equals empty array. Every time I see an
Render in
H2, I
H2,
push
you
it
push
in,
it. Yeah, yep, yep.
and then I return that, and now there's my thing. And now I use that in my component that builds the table of contents. I just change something in the CMS. I change the title. Everything updates. Everything works. It's all dynamic now.
Awesome. Let me respond to this because I want to respond to this in basically two different ways.
Okay.
The first way is like the MDX developer would say like, no, like unified JS, there's a way to do that where we have a plugin system and you can add a plugin, and as you basically are going to get an AST, and as you can basically walk the AST every time you walk in H2 or whatever, you can push to a table of contents thing, and then you could insert that table of contents anywhere inside your MDX file. So you could like insert it as an array that's readable by another part, or you could insert it as like HTML that has clickable links. So that would be kind of like the like how do you do this
MDX
in
and
MDX?
unified. Yeah.
But then I want to kind of respond to that, which is what you're saying here, which is it's so much nice when you don't have to learn those systems. Like it's just so much nice when you're using Node. Like I've got a thing in Node. Let me parse it how I want. I will say that like the unified that those APIs they're hard. The docs aren't good. You very quickly end up in like you're writing like AST. Remember when we used to do like AST transform code where you're doing
Sure.
like ancestors walk and all,
Sure, sure, sure.
you very quickly end up there. So it's like,
Yep.
it's not user friendly. But I think the more important thing, it's not like, oh no, you can actually do that in MDX and here's how. It's that having to learn those plugin systems and
It's
having
a
to learn
huge
it.
barrier. It's a huge
Yes.
point of friction, especially when you're in the middle of building something. I think
Yes.
there's a lot of value in those sorts of ecosystems and plugins like that, for sure. I'm not saying that there's not value in abstractions like that. Um, and if you look at Markdoc, like there's probably a better way to do what I'm doing, and it would probably involve doing something like walking. They have like a
Yeah.
node
Yeah.
in Ancestor, and so they have some ways to do that thing. But I so I'm not saying that those plugins and plugin ecosystems aren't valuable. I think what I'm saying is that RSC has a potential to make what those ecosystems look like vastly simpler in the future. I think that stuff is going to be much, much simpler in the future. And I don't think we're going to have separate ways of composing different parts of the process just because it has to do with this type of file or this type of content or because it's in a database or it's on the file system. All of it's the server or client. That's
Right.
the only buckets that matter anymore. And now that you have these two bomb shelters where you can go to town with those things and you have the RSC payload in between, then, never the
You could
twixt
never
shall
do this
meet
in
or
a
whatever.
you could never do this in a React component because that React component was going to have to run on the client. And
Exactly.
so, but now you can. And yeah, man, I think it's really, really valuable to just look at node code and not think, I want this stuff in React. How do I
Yes.
avoid React? Because it needs to be
Yes.
like isomorphic and run in two environments. And
Exactly.
yeah,
That's a great way to put it. I want to import this SVG and render it as a React component. Well, before server components, how the freaking heck would you do that? That doesn't even like, how would you do that? It doesn't make sense.
yeah, get
What
server
you do
side
is
props, like
yeah,
Webpack loader, like, but again, it's
yeah,
just a lot to learn. And
yeah. How do you import an SVG? How you read file? Yeah, you can't fs read file and like get server stuff. No one does that. That's weird. Like because get static props. Maybe you can do that. I don't know. It's just weird. You feel like you're in a different domain. I think that's a nice way to phrase it. What you said. I want to do this thing that is totally reasonable to do on the server. I'm running server side code. I'm here in my shell on my developer machine, and I can do this. I can double click this image because it's sitting here in my file system. How do I get it to my React component? You're telling me I have to learn Webpack loader API and they just switch from 4 to 5, or I have to do this other
no,
thing like
but yeah, you could use like get server side props, but you're always doing
right.
it outside of React,
Yes,
which
of
was the bummer.
React.
Yeah.
Right, and then you're
So
also
you're
not
not like
thinking
writing a
right.
React app anymore.
Exactly, not running a React app, and it's not clear about this like the stuff you want to keep on the server, right? So like the syntax highlighting thing, you're like, I'm just going to do this ahead of time so that my React app doesn't even know about this
Yeah,
because it doesn't
exactly.
need to. That's the key thing. So yeah, pretty interesting, man. It's pretty thought provoking night in terms of thinking how RSCs could be used, and I think there's a lot. I think
Nice.
the RSC payload being the kind of the key point of all of this, it's pretty thought provoking. It covers a lot of use cases, and just that kind of realization that like when I'm writing the content of a blog post in our high graph CMS, and then authoring the code, the client components, even though we're not an app direct, the client components that I want to run eventually in the browser, I was doing the same thing that RSC server render is doing.
Yeah. Oh
It's
yeah,
pretty.
yeah.
You're
That
compiling
there's
away the Markdown. I'm compiling away the server components into React elements or whatever is on that boundary. Give into the common a React tree of client components that get turned into holes, and then the actual code gets shipped to the browser. It's the same thing.
yeah. I think it's gonna be yes. I think it's gonna be really, really good when we button it, like get it
Yep.
working in RSC. And so yes.
Yep. Yes. I
Also, I
can't.
just
That's the next step. I want to see because now it is working right now, and I was like, yeah, I want to see what it's like in an actual RSC.
being node only is gonna be It's gonna be it's tough pill to swallow
For what is?
for like cold starts and stuff.
On Vercel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So maybe there's
Yep.
some way we can.
I think the node only thing came really. Markdoc was fine with that. There's nothing wrong with that. It was Shiki, and it was actually working. I think there's. It has to do with I don't even know what WASM is, dude. It was like 2 o'clock. I'm like, I'm not learning about WASM. I've got 19 tabs open. I can't learn about one more thing. And WASM just sounds crazy. And it was like you have to async load it, and it was working locally. I pushed it. I looked at a preview build, which is using Vercel Edge, and it said
but yeah.
it's a security violation. You're not allowed to load WASM from some trusted thing. And then there was an issue about like providing it as a 64 blob.
Yeah.
And
Goodbye.
I couldn't quite get it working. So
Cool.
if we had to do highlight JS or something, I think that would probably work
No.
on Edge or something like
Yeah,
that.
but we should use dude. Shiki is really really good.
It's awesome. I don't know. I just don't know. I kind of got stuck because I really wanted it to keep it Edge and everything, but I just got stuck.
Cool.
But I think we could get it working. I think we could get it working
Yeah.
because Vercel has a page about WASM on their thing. They have like again like a loader. You import it your WASM file and you add question mark module to the string and then it like magically is there. And I was making progress. Like I got rid of the error, but then it was saying it couldn't find. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't load like the themes and
It was something about there's an experimental async WebAssembly and sync WebAssembly flags that I was enabling. Also, I don't know if we're on the latest. So I don't know if we're on the latest of some of our dependencies. So I was thinking the first step would be to upgrade everything and make sure we're on the latest and then try it out.
cool. Another kind of interesting thing is every time I've used Shiki, it's I could never get it to be like fast in the sense that if you're doing it in like the request response cycle, it would be noticeably there would just be noticeable lag. So I wonder if there's like an argument here for like
It seemed pretty fast to me, but
okay
yeah.
okay
But I think this is another interesting part of the architecture is that assuming you have all of this work being done in a server component, it's nice because it's the way you would solve like a slow rendering React server component is the same way you would solve this problem.
Yep.
Let's say you have a D3 thing that is slow to generate some crazy SVG, but it's the same for everybody. So you want to cache it somehow.
Exactly.
You could do it at build time. You could do it ahead of time. We could move this. In this case, we could move this from get server-side props to get static props and add a webhook that when we update the CMS, it revalidates that with ISR. That's really fast. I've seen that set up before. It's really fast that does that, but then you don't every person's not doing that as part of the request.
yeah
And all that work is happening in get server-side props, so it would just be cached.
right. I think I would start with a cache, right? Like
Yep.
you go to
I think
generate
in
the
the-
syntax
yeah.
code. First, you look for it in a cache. If it's in the cache, use
Right.
what's in there. Otherwise,
Right.
Otherwise, right.
Yep.
Just something simple, like something that's
Yep.
very, very cool.
Yeah, man. It was a lot of fun. Cool. Why don't we wrap it up there?
Yeah.
I guess we're gonna be going to ReactConf, which is exciting.
Yeah.
So that's in May in Vegas, right?
Henderson. Yeah.
Yeah. Where is Henderson?
It's Vegas.
Oh boy, we gotta be careful going to Vegas twice in a year. But I'm super stoked for that. So we should definitely both be there. I think you'll be able to make it, right?
Yeah, I gotta maybe. We'll see.
Yeah, check with the fam.
Yeah.
But I'm definitely gonna be there. So if you're also going, hit us up. Let us know. Love to say hi to folks who are listeners and chat about whatever's on your mind. But until then, I guess we will be seeing you next week. And we're going to send out an email this week with some of the new stuff that we've been working on. Ryan's had a bunch of YouTube videos go up the last few weeks. Some really cool stuff about server components and new React features. And we have a blog, my blog post I mentioned, so we'll be calling that out as well. So you can check that out at buildui.com/newsletter. Otherwise, hit us up at Front End First FM on Twitter if you have anything you want to say, any questions, anything you want us to talk about. And thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
See ya.
Bye.